This episode is brought to you by the Arvada Center. Getting Away with Murder has never been this much fun. A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder is a musical comedy about just how far one poor clerk named Monty will go to claim his inheritance. Running March 28th through May 11th at the Arvada Center, you can get your tickets now for this Tony Award-winning musical. Just go to arvadacenter.org. That's arvadacenter.org. I'm calling Nana. This episode is brought to you by the Port Aransas Chamber of Commerce. Just off the Texas coast sits a unique beach town marked with salty vibes and sun-soaked memories. Port Aransas is a place where family traditions unfold naturally, and beauty lies both in island views and the unhurried moments between adventures. One visit and you'll see why so many have anchored their traditions to the island way of life. Trade mountain peaks for 18 miles of uninterrupted shoreline and start your new favorite family tradition in Port Aransas, Texas. Go to visitportaransas.com and plan your visit. That's visitportaransas.com.
Today on CityCast Denver, it's always nice to hear an outsider's perspective on our city, and it's especially interesting when that person is your boss. Mine was in town this past weekend for our big Heyday event, so I invited him for an interview to hear his thoughts on Denver and to give you all a look behind the curtain on how this whole CityCast thing works. So please enjoy CityCast CEO / longtime host of Slate's Political Gabfest, David Plotz, on downtown Denver and the one problem he thinks we really need to solve. Today is Wednesday, March 12th. I'm Paul Caroli, and here's what Denver's talking about. CityCast CEO David Plotz, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Hello, Paul Caroli. How are you?
I'm good. So you just spent the weekend here in Denver because we threw this big event, Heyday. How'd you like our city?
I had an excellent time. I'm going to confess something.
Phew.
Last time I was in Denver, I kind of left Denver and I talked some shit about Denver.
I know. That's what I want to grill you about today.
I felt like the city felt sort of chaotic. All the food I ate wasn't any good. And then this time, ate amazing food, like met awesome people, loved walking around the city. I walked around parts of the city I hadn't seen before, which I think are all the kind of gentrified, everything is a loft parts of town. But it was interesting. I loved the kind of way in which the visible physical city is this, not actually a fight, a conversation between all these new people who are moving in and having their lives and the industrial city that existed before it. And so that area in Rhino and Five Points, it's gorgeous. It's interesting. Like the contrast is fantastic. I love the rail just coming in and out. Loved it.
Some people want to move that rail out of the city. They say it's too dangerous.
Oh, don't do it. It's texture. It makes it a city in a way that is fantastic.
So this, I knew that you had this feeling last time you left. And it's really interesting to me because I think when you all came, it was like 2, maybe 3 years ago. And it was right when we had this new mayor who had these new ideas for downtown and he was going to clean it up and make it a vibrant city. And so now that your impression is that it has changed, or at least your perception is that it has changed. Tell me more about that. What did you see visually on the street?
Well, I was in a different part of town last time. So it may be that if I were more over on, 16th Street.
I think last time you were more like Larimer Square, and now we're sitting in the beautiful brand new Raleigh Hotel,
right, with
a lovely view of Coors Field.
Yeah, I mean, so it may be just a different part of town. I did feel it was kind of it was late pandemic the last time we were here. It was still pandemic. The city felt kind of desolate. So whenever I was walking around, I felt like, man, this is a really desolate downtown. There was a lot of evident homelessness, drug use. I'm from a city, so it doesn't feel that malevolent or threatening, but it doesn't feel good. I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And then my consumption just felt wan. Everything I ate felt kind of wan and half-assed.
Wan?
Yeah, just like
can you define this word for us?
We're
in Denver here, David. We don't.
A little bit without flavor, a little bit just boring.
Yeah.
And this time, exactly the opposite in all respects. And I don't know. I have no idea whether there's less visible homelessness, whether there's been abatement of the drug problem or it's just purely just where I wandered.
Yeah. Depends on who you ask.
And just the public art, the amount of public art, the murals. I know murals are kind of cheesy, but it's wonderful to walk down streets and just see this variety of visual stimulation. And I mean, I think that all those loft conversions are really horrible and tedious, but and you guys are going to regret it in a few years. But for now, it does, I think, probably lend, it neatens things up in a way that's probably helpful.
I wish our host Bree was here, because this is her same opinion about those new builds, those loft conversion buildings.
I was thinking that maybe one thing we could do as a new line of business is we could start a business which was loaning words to developers. Because I feel like they're probably running out, because you've got like canvas, steel, diamond, and then you've got names after famous people: Dylan, Edison, Waterford, and they're going to run out pretty soon. And so they might need new words for us to come up with.
You got a pitch? What would you name one of these buildings?
I was thinking, how about this? One which has its amenity is it's got a little podcast studio in the basement. Not in the basement. They don't have basements. That's just bike parking in the basement. Podcast studio on the roof. And you'd call it Yarn.
Ooh.
And it'd be because people would be telling stories.
This is a building that tells its own story.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we just sold a loft.
Boom.
So I'm getting a sense that you walked up through Rhino, what I would call Rhino,
correct.
On Larimer
Yes.
Street. Okay.
Yes.
Tell me, what are your impressions? What else did you see? What did you feel?
Okay. Now I'm going to bring my brutal hot take, which is also an assignment for you.
Love it.
You live in a city that is like Paris in one very important way. There is more dog shit on the street in Denver, Colorado than in any American city I've been in since I was like 7 years old. Like, I feel like every other American city I've been in, people have learned how to pick up their dog shit. No problem. Once in a blue moon, you'll see, someone left something there, probably like whatever, they ran out of bags. It's dangerous walking through the streets, at least in that part of Denver, because there is an immense amount of dog shit around. Immense.
I thought this was going to be an assignment for me as a journalist.
It is an
Are you just
assignment
going
for
to tell me to go
No,
pick it up?
No, the story. It's a story you guys need to do. It's like, why can Denver not manage this basic function, this basic civic function of civilized life that every other city manages? And I'm sure there are reasons.
Yeah.
Like, I'm talking to people at Heyday about this, and a couple of them said, Denver has more dogs than any other city. Also, you have a plastic bag ban, so people don't have plastic bags, but you can buy those dog bags.
This is a good idea. We should work on this.
It's ridiculous. It is, and you might not notice it as a Denver citizen, as a Denverite. You might just think, this is how things are. But no, that's not how things are, at least in that part of town. And it may be just a function of like uncivilized loft dwellers who have no sense of social responsibility.
I love this. Is there anything else? Because so you have run this company that does daily local news podcasts now in 13 cities. You've done it for like 4 or 5 years now.
4 years. You guys are about your 4th anniversary, right?
Later this month. It's very exciting.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you've learned about Denver as relative to these other cities from having run this company?
Well, so you and Chicago were our first 2 cities. So we launched here with you, and then in Chicago with that wonderful team there. And Denver continues to be our biggest podcast. So we have the largest podcast audience in the network out of Denver, even though
I'm just basking in this right now. I'm enjoying this.
It's just factual. It's descriptive.
Yeah, go on.
And I think, of course, that's a tribute to great work that you and Bree and Olivia and Peyton do, and that's, it's overwhelmingly, it's a result of that. You guys are in the fabric of the city, and people know you, and we saw at Heyday where we were talking with fans of the show, but also the mayor, talking about how much feedback he gets when he appears on CityCast Denver. So you've clearly done a job getting people connected. But I also think that probably the nature of the city is the right on kind of city, in the sense that it has a lot of growth. So it has intentions around growth, and that's a core topic. I also think that one of the things that I'm learning more about CityCast is that CityCast is most useful to people when it's not really about blue-red fighting, that blue-red issues, people get enough about the blue-red issues in all this other media they're consuming. And I'm sure lots of your listeners have very strong feelings about what's happening with the Trump administration and what's happening in Washington. I'm sure that animates a lot of them. But they get a lot of news about that elsewhere. And we tend to do best when what we're talking about are issues where citizens who might agree on the top line political issues of the country are actually then discussing issues which are totally different, like dog shit on the street, or bike lane, or the nature of the development that we're going to have in the city, or
tipping,
and those kinds of issues. I think work in cities. So I think cities that are blue cities within bluish states are in a way easier for us than blue cities that are in very red states. Because in blue cities and very red states, there's so much tension that is blue-red, even in the urban issues. And that's, I think that is one thing that I'm learning, which is that I think we have an easier time when we don't talk about blue-red issues and instead are talking blue-purple issues, or issues that just don't really have political valence.
Which is a really good explanation of why we're expanding to two new cities, Seattle and the Twin Cities, this year.
Yeah,
I think fit that definition.
They do fit that definition. They certainly, that's not the only reason we're going to those cities. Those cities have lots of wonderful qualities, but that is a particular aspect that we've been noticing. I mean, we make great, we have podcasts that are blue cities and red states, blue cities and purple states, blue cities and blue states, pinkish cities and red states, and they're all doing a great job. I think when in terms of acquiring audience, though, I think that the less we are obsessed with national political things that people hear elsewhere, the better. The more that you can really get into what makes life in Denver distinctive, life in Chicago distinctive, life in Philly distinctive. Those very particular tactile issues that you smell, you feel, you see when you walk down the street are what I think we thrive on.
This episode is brought to you by 5280 Magazine. Calling all Denver area brunch lovers, 5280 Magazine's annual brunch event is just a few weeks away. Have you bought your tickets yet? The 5280 brunch event is on Saturday, March 29th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Asterisk in Rhino. Guests will be treated to an afternoon jam-packed with sweet and savory brunch menus from editor-picked restaurants, plus tasty beverages including zero-proof options, a build-your-own Bloody Mary station, a dynamic DJ set from DJ Mr. Groove, and so much more. Seriously, have you read any of 5280's food coverage? These people know brunch. And they know that brunch is best enjoyed with friends. That's why they have a specially priced group ticket option for groups of 4 or more. Simply choose the GA ticket type Brunch Crew to redeem. Get your tickets now at 5280.com and tell them Bree sent you. Mimosas.
Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Let's talk about the company a little bit. I think listeners will be curious to, if we could peel back the curtain a little bit, talk about how this podcast company works. So I solicited some questions from some of my colleagues, some hard questions for you, I hope. Here's one from our roving producer, Francisco Kilgore. Francisco, who works with us sometimes on CityCast Denver, says, you do the Political Gabfest every week for like 20 years. So you know the national news, but now you're the CEO of this local news company. How has the local orientation changed the way you think about the country?
That's a great question. So I host a national political podcast. So some of your listeners don't know this, for Slate, called the Slate Political Gabfest. Mm-hmm. Well, I will say this. It's been so demoralizing being someone who, I've lived in Washington all my life, and I've been part of the political journalism ecosystem for most of my career, but it's obviously really dismal and depressing and hard to watch what's happening. And for me, I spend as little time as possible thinking about learning about the national political issues. Not because they're not important. They're so important. They affect my neighbors. They affect your neighbors. But because A, I feel impotent to do anything about it, and B, because stewing in it does me no good. Like, I would much rather not stew in it. And I think to me, what I've learned is that local life, the community life, the neighborly life in our cities is so much more available to me as a thing to think about, to act on, to be part of, and to feel like I'm making an actual difference. I can make a small, tangible difference in my home city of Washington, D.C. by going and volunteering at the Rock Creek Conservancy, or by shopping at a particular store that is doing good work, or eating at a local restaurant. And that is so much more satisfying for me as a citizen and as a journalist than just sitting and thinking about whatever national distress is happening.
I've heard this from friends more and more lately, since November, since January. Like, people, I think, are wanting to get more involved locally, just to feel like there is that. I mean, people are understanding that they have that option to, like, get that sense of fulfillment and civic engagement and connection, and you can do that in a million ways in your own neighborhood.
Right. And I think like what makes me so joyful about the job that we're doing here, and I hope what makes you excited about running CityCast Denver, is like, if we do CityCast Denver well, or CityCast DC, or CityCast Philly well, what we are doing is we're giving people the tools to be better neighbors. And when they're better neighbors, they become better citizens of their city. They're more knowledgeable. They're more engaged. They have more possibility of being involved. Like, that's, to me, is what a great way to spend time and work.
Yeah. And if that's valuable to you, you can sign up and become a member and support what we're doing at membership.citycast.fm.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Paul, that was a spot bonus for you.
Pro move. Here's a question that my counterpart in Salt Lake City, Emily Means, wanted me to ask. This is a question they've received from critics. And I've heard some people here have had similar questions about who owns CityCast and how can we claim to be local when there's this big mysterious entity behind us.
Well, there's not a big mysterious entity behind us. There's a publicly traded corporation, the Graham Holdings Company, which I would really encourage you listeners of CityCast Denver, do research about. It's a company which for many years was the Washington Post company. It owned the Washington Post newspaper, and family named Graham controlled the Washington Post newspaper. They sold the Washington Post newspaper about a decade ago to Jeff Bezos, but they kept a whole lot of other businesses which they built up. So my old employer, Slate, was a business they built up. Foreign Policy Magazine. They own 6 local TV stations. They own Kaplan, the for-profit education company. They own a large healthcare company called Graham Healthcare. They own the Hoover Treated Wood Products, the largest manufacturer of fire-retardant lumber in the United States.
It's a little bit 30 Rock.
It is a really incredibly well-run company, run by some of the most thoughtful, admirable people I've known. The longtime chairman of the Graham Holding Company, Don Graham, who is the publisher of the Washington Post during most of my adult life, CEO of the Washington Post Company, he's the living person I know who I admire most. He's just and I would encourage anybody there's a new film about Katharine Graham, who's the creator of this company, who was the CEO of the Washington Post during the Watergate crisis, and navigated, when you talk about media ownership that is serving the public good, Katharine Graham is the absolute embodiment of it. And I feel that there's a new documentary about her called Becoming Katharine Graham that just came out this week on Amazon. And it's so inspiring. And this company lives by those same values today. And what they've done is they've decided, we think it's really important to build up the local news ecosystem around the world, around the country. And we're going to put resources in so that we can do it. And we're going to hire the best people that we can find in these cities to build very local podcasts and newsletters that are going to make a difference for their city. And God bless them for having the foresight and the resources and the kind of conviction that local news matters, and to be willing to make an investment of the scale where we can pay Paul Corolli's salary, we can pay for your 2 Porsches. And that's a joke. Paul doesn't get 2 Porsches.
No, listeners know I drive a Prius.
that we can do that. And it is true, we have a national owner, but that's because our national owner has the resources to say, like, we believe in this and we can build this a national network by getting people who are very local to do the work. Right now, we have an amazing company that is willing to put its money behind this and do it in 13, soon 15 cities.
Yeah. I think there's like pluses and minuses to it. I mean, minuses like our whole company is on Zoom pretty much. Like here locally, we meet in person a couple times a week, and I love that. I really enjoy working with my colleagues, but we had not met for 2 years, probably, you and I, in person when you hired me to do this and during the pandemic. And still, that's true for many of my colleagues around the country. And it's a hard way to work. But then on the other hand, the pluses are like, it's great to trade notes, like if I'm working on a story about tipping, like I mentioned earlier, I get to talk to people in cities that have very different tipping cultures because of their different regulations. And I don't think that's true about all of our competition locally. Like it's hard to have perspective on your city.
Yeah.
When you're in it.
That is so true. I mean, like, I think that I don't know whether this will turn into a CityCast Denver episode or not, but just like the dog shit episode, like that's something which happens because, somebody who's not from Denver is here and is like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
Why are you different than other cities?
It's helpful.
And I think I also feel like the reason we're building a network is that a network gives us some economy of scale. So there's certain things that we can do because we're a network more easily, which is like when one of your colleagues is out sick, like you don't have to scramble. We have a centralized team of people who can fill in to help make sure you guys can proceed normally. And
the aforementioned Francisco Kilgore,
exactly. Francisco lives in California, but he will come work, in quotes, in Denver if Olivia has vacation or has the flu.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I got a question here for you from Political Gabfest superfan, friend of CityCast Denver, and occasional sponsor of CityCast Denver, Frank Locantore of the Colfax Avenue Business Improvement District. Hi, Frank.
I haven't been to Colfax Avenue. That was like one of the things that I was hoping to do because I hear you guys talk about the Colfax bid and Colfax all the time.
Yeah.
And I just didn't get over there.
Next time.
There's a lot of construction.
Right now, there's a lot of construction. You're going to have to come back in like 2028 to see the new, bigger, better Colfax.
Okay.
So Frank has a question for you because he knows that you're a history buff, and he wants to know if you see parallels between the preponderance of news in the early 21st century compared to the wide and plentiful dissemination of newspapers in the early 20th century.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think he's getting at something really interesting, which is that the early 20th century in the U.S., there was this explosion of newspapers around the U.S. Explosion. Like it was this great, incredible mass medium of communication. I mean, it's really sort of late 19th century, and every city had one. And then radio pretty quickly follows on. So there's this almost like this twofer of radio rising up, and then newspapers everywhere, morning newspapers, afternoon newspapers. They weren't, the rules of newspapers had not locked in the way they locked in kind of the mid-century. So there were newspapers that were yellow journalism. They were very much more ideological. They were ginning up public emotion.
Sure, the sensationalism dragged our country into the Spanish-American War, for example.
Right. And so in a way, what's the anomalous period in American life is the period from, say, the 1950 to the rise of Fox News, when there's this kind of consensus journalism, and journalism is being very respectable. And that's an anomalous period that exists because there is local newspapers kind of developed these very powerful monopolies. They monopolized classifieds ads. They were super profitable, and it was very important for them to be consensus building institutions. There were only 3 TV networks. And so again, there was no percentage in like being really crazy and weird because you would lose so much audience. But once this fragmentation happens with the rise of cable and with the rise of new media and the internet, the kind of consensus, institutional consensus vanishes, and everyone starts screaming in different ways.
Sounds familiar.
I do think it's similar. But I think the internet is such an accelerant of bad behavior, and such an accelerant of lies, and such an accelerant of cruelty. And so I worry that things moved more slowly in the 19th century, and people got less angry, and there was still more sort of face-to-face contact with the people that you were sliming in print. And I feel like what's happened today is that the internet has allowed people to be much crueler, much baser. And I'm not sure that we're ever going to develop the institutional trust again that we used to have.
I wonder.
That's terrible.
Well, what about the new institutions? You know, the concentration of power and money around these big tech companies that are our platforms now.
Yeah, but they do not create trust. They create mistrust generally. They allow people to find a corner and get in that corner and mistrust everybody that's not in that corner. I actually think to me, not to bring it back to CityCast, but one of the things that I think about CityCast is that what we are trying to be in like this age of kind of information overload and AI slop, and that we are this trusted voice because we have there's a local authenticity, a local knowledge, a local depth of knowledge, and a humanity in the human voice that people can come to trust. Now, not everyone's going to come to trust it. Some people are going to be like, "Oh, Bree Davies, what a commie," or whatever it is that they want to say about her, but that in general, like if you're there for people day after day, and you are consistently you're modeling civil, interesting, curious conversation, like that creates a trust over time. Not for everyone, but hopefully for more people. And I hope that's what CityCast, to me, that's what CityCast success looks like in 40 years is like people know, oh, this is a place where there's going to be a really interesting civil conversation about something that super matters for my community today.
Let me ask you one last question. We're in the media business. Media businesses fail all the time. Layoffs are always in the headlines. I think listeners probably want to know this more than anything, especially listeners who love the show every day. What's the state of the business behind the podcast they love?
So we talked earlier about how we have the parent company, Graham Holdings, and Graham Holdings is a company that's a very successful, publicly traded company, profitable company, and they've made investments in us, and they've made investments. No secret, we've said this before, like they're continuing to make investments. CityCast right now is not profitable. We do not bring in enough revenue to pay everyone's salary. You could only buy one Porsche, say. But the good news is that we're growing in all the respects. So our revenue is growing fast, our membership numbers are growing, and our audiences are growing. And we have to keep that up, and the pace that we need to grow is, it's a nice steep curve, steep angle. We got to really trudge up that mountain.
We have ambitious goals.
But the direction is all good. It's all up, which is great.
Well, David Plotz, thanks for joining me.
Paul, what a pleasure.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell someone who didn't pick up their dog poop about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then. All right. There you go. Finally remember to do it. We can finish the show now.